Hi guys, I haven't made a video in a while. I've been a little bit busy, which if you're a nurse, you know that you're going to be working a lot unless, I don't know, I guess unless you have other ways of making money other than going to work. For me, it's work. So I've been working a lot. Christmas is coming up. Christmas is always expensive, as everybody knows, so I've been busy, but I had a few minutes to spare today and I thought I'd catch up with all of you. So I got a request for a video about cost of living in Texas, and particularly salaries in Texas, which I guess will sort of spill into cost of living and the kind of lifestyle that you can expect to have if you're living in Texas as a nurse. So if you go on Google, this information is available, but I guess what people want is detail. So the average salary for a nurse in Texas is about $90,000. So that means when you add up the salaries of the nurses who are making the least amount of money and the most amount of money and everybody in between, and then you divide it by the number of nurses, you're going to get an average of about 90,000. If you are a newly qualified nurse, what you make will really depend on where you choose to work. So I'd say the biggest sort of cities or metropolitan areas in Texas are Houston and Dallas. And then Austin would be probably around number 3. It's not as big as those cities. So the money that you'll make in Austin may not be comparable to what you'll make in Houston and Dallas, but it should be enough money for you to live on. I live in the Austin area. I don't live in Austin exactly, but I live in the Austin area and I do okay. So if you're thinking, I want to move to Texas, there are a lot of positives for moving to Texas. As a new grad nurse, I think if I remember correctly, it's going to vary depending on which health system you go and choose to work for. So some of the health systems, from what I've seen, graduate nurses make maybe around $35 per hour, and maybe slightly less, just depending on where you choose to go and work. So as a graduate nurse, yes, money is important, but I think more important than money, if I was a new grad at this time, I'd be wanting to go and work somewhere where I'm going to have really good support, because the reality of it is when you first graduate and become a registered nurse, that is when you actually start to learn. What you learned in nursing school, yeah, it's great, but you start to really learn when you first graduate, and you are the one who is accountable for your actions and your omissions. When you're a student, yes, you're responsible and you have a level of accountability, but it's ultimately the person who's precepting you. So I would choose somewhere with a good orientation or preceptorship system, a good nurse residency system or program, over a place that pays me more, because you can go somewhere where they pay you more but not get good support, and then that can set you up for failure in your nursing career, because you might start to really hate nursing when actually if you'd gone somewhere where you were well supported, you might have ended up really loving nursing and seeing lots of options and possibilities for yourself. On the higher end, if you have maybe, let's say for example, about 20 years experience in nursing, and I'm talking about just a regular bedside nurse, you're looking at making somewhere between $55 and $60 per hour as a base rate. And then if you add on things like maybe working on the weekend or evening time or night shift, that money will also go up beyond the 55 to 60. So it's not bad. I think compared to other professions, you'll be able to make a very comfortable living. Another thing to note is if you stay in one place, it might be difficult for you to increase the amount of money that you're making quickly. Because generally what employers will do, if you're someone who hasn't worked in the US before, how it will work is annually you'll have a performance review. And if based on your performance review, you demonstrate that you are doing well in your job, then your manager will sign and say, yes, you deserve to get the annual increase. So that would be the only way that you can increase your pay. And generally that annual increase that is performance based, as in you as an individual, is about 3% of your salary. So that would be the only way to increase your pay. But if you wanted to increase your pay by more, you would have to go and look for another job somewhere else and negotiate a higher pay. So, that also depends on, do I love where I work so much that I don't want to leave even for money? Or do I want to make more money no matter where I go, no matter where I work? So that's a decision that you would have to make. In terms of increasing your pay in other ways, if you are someone who's looking to get away from the bedside, I think I discussed this before in another video, you could go back to school and do a master's or a doctorate and become a nurse practitioner or a nurse anesthetist. But I think it's something that you have to consider really seriously, because going back to school means money. You have to pay towards that education. And it's going to be several $1,000s per year. So you have to ask yourself, the stage that you are at in your career, is it worth going back to school, spending that money on a master's degree to earn maybe just a little bit more or the same as what you were making? Some people will justify it and say, well, at least I'm not a bedside nurse anymore. So if being a bedside nurse is that much of a problem for you, then it's definitely worth going back to school and becoming a nurse practitioner or a CRNA. But you also have to consider the time. It's going to cost you your time, because there's a lot of studying involved. So that means less time for you to maybe potentially do overtime if you're someone who was doing overtime shifts before to work on whatever projects you were working on. And then the cost financially, are you prepared to either pay cash for it or take loans out to go and study? And if you do take a loan, then what you have to consider is when you finish that master's or that doctorate and you become a nurse practitioner or a CRNA, even though your pay has gone up, you now have this loan to pay off for the degree that you did to become a nurse practitioner or a CRNA. So all those things I think are important to consider. Personally, I actually enrolled in a doctorate program sometime this year. I did one module, and the amount of work that it required was just too much for me. It was taking up a lot of my time. I had saved up money. I was going to pay for it in cash so I wouldn't have debt afterwards. But when I considered the time that it was taking away from me personally, I had started to really enjoy just being able to relax and not study. And then the time it was taking away from time I spend with my children, I considered it wasn't worth it. So I dropped out of that program. I have no regrets. When I think about the stress that I had in the short time that I was enrolled, I think to myself, what on earth were you doing? But this is not a prescription. I'm not saying to anyone, don't go and do a doctorate or a master's. I mean, my reasons for it were very personal. I wanted more time to myself, and I knew that time is something I wasn't going to be able to get back. So I saved the money that I had saved to go back to school, and I used it on something else that I felt was more important to me. And I'm happy with my decision. It's not stopped me from being able to pursue other roles that I want to pursue in nursing. And also, like I mentioned before, the more years experience you have as a nurse, the more you'll earn per hour. So you will be able to make good money if you have more years experience. So that's enough about pay, I guess. If anyone has more questions about pay, I'd be happy to answer them. And then if you're looking at cost of living in Texas, there are advantages of being in Texas. I moved to Texas from Arizona. I was living in a very rural part of Arizona, and my biggest concern with living there was it was so small that there was, I think, one hospital in the whole city, and then there'd be several clinics and other things, and that hospital was one of the biggest employers, and I was working for them as an agency nurse, the agency that had brought me to the States. And my concern with staying in that small city with very few and limited employment opportunities was, if for whatever reason I could no longer work for that hospital, what would be my other options in terms of employment? In comparison to that, here in Texas, I live in Austin, it's not as big as Houston or Dallas, but if I decided today I didn't want to work for either of my two employers, there'd be so many other options. I'd be able to go and work somewhere else instantly because there are many, many other options. And I think that as a nurse, that is important. When you think about, especially when you're still a young nurse and you're trying to figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you, you need to be able to move around flexibly until you find your vibe, until you find what works for you. The stage I'm at now, the first employer that I had when I first came to Texas, I still work for them. I like my managers. I like the people I work with. I like the work that I do. I like the patient group. I recently started working for another health system, a competitor in the area. I like it there too. But I think a lot of that has come down to the older you get, the more you realize that there isn't a perfect employer. You're going to go somewhere and there will be problems there, and you just have to decide, can I work with these problems or not? Is this my vibe or not? And sometimes it will only just boil down to money. It may just be that no matter what issues are there, you like what they pay you so much that you're not going anywhere. So that was my reasoning for moving to Texas. I also wanted to be closer to family because we have family in Texas. So I wanted to be able to visit them without getting in an airplane and flying somewhere. So that was a factor why I moved to Texas. I also was considering the cost of housing compared to maybe the East Coast. New York is very expensive to live, even though you're going to be paid really good money because you're in New York, but the cost of living there, particularly because of the housing, would be a lot higher. And I honestly did not research New York that much, but I do know that compared to Texas, it's more expensive to live there. I did consider California because that is where nurses are paid the most, but California is also very, very, very expensive to live in. So I had to consider that and say, well, I'm going to earn a lot of money, but would I be able to buy a home and have that stability of owning a home, or would I be renting while living in California? However, California is really beautiful. And I think living there would be amazing if I could afford to. So I chose Texas again because it was affordable in terms of being able to come here and buy a home. I think I bought my house within a year of arriving in Texas. I was in a position to be able to buy a house, which I was very grateful for. And if you're looking at, I guess, let's say you're first arriving, because maybe I'm talking to people who are planning to come to Texas. When you're first arriving, chances are you're going to be renting an apartment. The rentals are affordable compared again to maybe somewhere like New York. You're going to get more space for your money. So I know that depending on the type of apartment that you're going for, if you're going for a basic one, and let's say you're going for a 1 bedroom, you're probably going to be paying just under 1,000 to maybe about 1,100. I'm not sure. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. And then if you're renting a bigger apartment, you can get an apartment with 3 to 4 bedrooms, depending on what your needs are. When I moved to Texas, I rented a 3-bedroom apartment. I felt it was expensive, but it was right next to where I worked, so I was prepared to pay for that convenience. I think I was paying about 2,300 for a 3-bedroom apartment. It was a nice apartment. It was right next to where I worked. It was 5 minutes from the children's school. So what I felt was too much for an apartment. The trade-off was having that convenience of being close to work and being close to the children's schools. And then buying a house, I guess, again, I would say homes are cheaper in Texas than maybe California or New York. I have a 4-bedroom house. It's about 2,200 square feet. Yeah, I think it's square feet that we use in this country. And it cost me about, gosh, I can't remember the price now. It was under 500,000, 400 and, what was it? I think it was something around 490,000, if I'm not mistaken. Which is fine, but what I will say is your property taxes in Texas are going to be high. And the reason for that in Texas is because they invest a lot into education. So depending on the value of your property, you might find that part of your property tax bill is a big chunk of it is going to be going towards education locally. So about 3,000 to 4,000 of your property tax bill will probably go towards education. For me, as someone whose children are still of a school-going age, that's a good thing because I love the schools that my kids go to. They go to really good schools. And I don't feel the need to supplement their education except for maybe preparing for something like the SATs. That is something that I made the decision that I was going to help my son with by paying an outside service to help him with more direct preparation for SATs. But other than that, I'm happy with the education that he receives, and that's down to the taxes that I'm paying. I pay a lot of tax, property tax. We don't pay income tax in Texas, which if you look at other states, you do pay income tax. Like in Arizona, we paid income tax in addition to federal tax. And then we also paid a city tax for the specific city that we lived in, and that was the city of Kingman. So in addition, so we paid federal tax, income tax, and then we paid 8% of our salary went towards the city. And when you look at the city, there was nothing special about it. So I often wondered, where does that 8% go? In terms of education, the education in Arizona was such that on Fridays, I'm not sure if it's the whole of Arizona or just the city we were in, on Fridays, the children didn't go to school. So if you were someone who worked Monday to Friday, you would have to figure out childcare for Fridays because your kids wouldn't be in school. So for me, being a nurse, at least I could request to be off on Fridays since the children wouldn't be in school on a Friday. So that's cost of living in terms of housing costs in Texas. Another thing that makes cost of living in Texas slightly more affordable than maybe, I'm going to keep comparing to California because I guess that would be the extreme opposite in terms of cost. The cost of fuel in Texas is cheaper than in California. I think for a gallon of fuel in Texas, you're going to pay less than half of what you would pay in California for a gallon of fuel. So obviously we know that fuel is what moves things from point A to point B. So the higher your fuel costs, the higher your costs of groceries. So groceries are also cheaper here than they would be in California. So that's something to be aware of. Would I stay in Texas forever? For some reasons, yes, but for other reasons, like for example, I just love seeing the world. Maybe not, maybe once my children are done with formative education, where they're done with high school, maybe I'll move to somewhere else and see what else is out there in the world. But for now, it works and it's got a lot of advantages. I'd be interested to hear what questions you have, and I would love to answer them. Thanks for watching, and thanks for interacting with me.